"Dad, stop embarrassing me. You can't even say the words right." That's what my daughter said to me. Loud, clear, cold. It wasn't whispered. It wasn't some slip of the tongue. No, it was deliberate, like a dagger, sharp and precise. And the moment she said it, the table erupted. Her new family, my so-called in-laws, broke into laughter like I was some bumbling clown dragged in off the street to entertain them. The worst part? My daughter, my own flesh and blood, the girl I raised, the girl I carried on my shoulders when she was little, laughed too. You ever had your heart crushed in front of an audience? That's what it felt like. Not just humiliation, betrayal. And listen, if stories like this hit you, real stories about betrayal, pride, and the kind of revenge that simmers until it explodes, make sure you subscribe. Because this story, it doesn't just sting. It burns all the way to the end. Now, back to that night. It was supposed to be a simple family dinner. My daughter had been married just a few months. Her husband's parents had invited us over. They had one of those houses where everything looks like it belongs in a magazine. Expensive art, long dining table, wine glasses that looked like they'd never seen a dishwasher. The kind of place where I immediately felt like I needed to sit straighter, watch my elbows, and mind every word. I was out of my element, and I knew it. I'm a self-made guy, construction, contracting, blue collar to the bone. My life was about hard work, real work. My hands, calloused. My back, scarred from years of lifting more than I probably should have. But I had pride. I had built something with my own sweat, my own stubbornness. These people, though, they lived in a different universe. They wore money like perfume, spoke in circles full of polished words and empty smiles. And my daughter? She had started blending into their world. So when the conversation drifted toward business, I thought I'd add a little something. Not to impress anyone, just to share. I've signed more contracts than I can count. I know what it means to negotiate, to hustle, to keep a roof over your family's head when the numbers barely add up. My English isn't fancy, my words aren't perfect, but damn it, I've lived it. So I jumped in. I used a term I'd picked up on a job years ago. Something simple. Something real. That's when it happened. Dad, don't use business terms in English. You sound ridiculous when you try. Her words hit me like a slap across the face. The laughter that followed was worse. Her husband's father leaned back, grinning, and even clapped me on the back like I was some little boy who'd try to say a grown-up word. Her mother smirked into her wine glass. Her brother-in-law outright chuckled. And my daughter, she laughed the hardest. Her eyes said it all. Embarrassed. Ashamed. Like she didn't want me there. Like I was dragging her down just by existing. I sat there, frozen, forcing a smile that felt like it might crack my teeth. My food had no taste. The air felt heavy. Every laugh at that table echoed in my head long after the noise stopped. Here's the thing, though. I didn't get angry at first. No, the first thing I felt was shame. Shame that maybe she was right. That maybe I did sound stupid. That maybe I didn't belong at that table with their suits and their fake sophistication. That maybe I was too rough, too old-fashioned, too small. But shame doesn't sit quietly forever. Shame festers. It grows teeth. And by the end of that night, as I drove home gripping the steering wheel so hard my knuckles went white, I knew the truth. They could laugh at me now. They could call me uneducated, outdated, beneath them. My own daughter could mock me to get a laugh from her new family. But I don't forget, and I don't forgive. One day, I promised myself every single one of them would choke on the very words that used to tear me down. After that dinner, something in my daughter changed. Or maybe it had already been changing, and that night was just the first time I had to face it. See, before she got married, my daughter and I were close. Not every day calling each other close, but close enough. She used to ask for my advice. She'd call me when her car made a weird sound. She'd ask me about mortgages, about bills, about little things she wasn't sure of. And I was proud to help. I wasn't the perfect dad, but I was there. Always there. But after the wedding, slowly the call stopped. At first, I didn't think much of it. She was building her new life. She was busy, I understood. But soon I realized she wasn't just busy. She was avoiding me. When we did talk, her tone was different. Colder. Sharper. She'd correct the way I pronounced words, like I was some student who needed tutoring. She'd make little jokes about how things are different in her husband's family. She started dressing differently too, talking differently, even eating differently. She was morphing into them. One night, she came over with her husband, and I noticed something that really stung. We were sitting in the living room, and I mentioned an old saying my father used to tell me. Something about working hard, being patient, and how persistence beats talent. She rolled her eyes. "Dad, nobody talks like that anymore," she said. "That's not how the world works now." Her husband smirked. He didn't even have to say anything. His face said it all. Like he was silently agreeing, "Yeah, your dad's outdated." I laughed it off, but it felt like a punch to the gut. I wanted to scream. "I built everything you grew up with. The roof over your head, the clothes you wore, the food on the table. All of it came from these old-fashioned values you think are useless now." But I stayed quiet. I just nodded and let it slide. That became a pattern. Every time I tried to connect, she pushed me away just a little more. She'd bring up something her husband's family said and treat it like gospel. If I offered a different perspective, she'd dismiss it. If I gave advice, she'd roll her eyes. If I mispronounced a word or got a term slightly wrong, she'd laugh. Sometimes gently, sometimes cruelly. The worst part? She started excluding me from conversations altogether. At family gatherings, I'd sit there at the edge of the table while she and her in-laws talked shop. Finance this, investments that, real estate deals, big contracts. I knew a thing or two about some of it, but the way they spoke was like a wall I couldn't get through. Polished words, technical terms, all delivered with that smug little smirk. And when I did try to chime in, my daughter would cut me off. "Dad, it's more complicated than that," she'd say, in that tone kids use when they think they've outgrown their parents. Sometimes she'd just ignore me completely. It wasn't just about business talk either. She stopped inviting me to small things. She'd go to her in-laws' house for holidays, for birthdays, for barbecues, and I'd get a text the next day. "Oh, we had such a great time. Sorry you couldn't make it." Only problem? I hadn't even been invited. It became painfully clear. In her new world, I didn't fit. At first, I blamed myself. Maybe I wasn't good enough. Maybe I should have studied more, refined myself, tried harder to fit in. Maybe if I had the right words, the right manners, the right polish, I wouldn't feel like such an outsider. But the more I thought about it, the more I realized it wasn't me. It was them. They had money, sure. They had status, fine. But underneath it all, they were insecure. They needed to laugh at someone to feel taller. And they decided I was the perfect target. My daughter, she just followed their lead. Still, that didn't make the sting any less sharp. Every time I saw her looking down on me, every time she cut me out of a conversation, every time she chose them over me, it felt like losing her piece by piece. And what burned the most wasn't just that I was losing her. It was that I was losing her to people who didn't deserve her respect. If the first dinner was a slap in the face, the next family gathering was a full-on beating. It was a barbecue at my daughter's in-laws' house. Big backyard, catered food, everyone dressed like they were at a networking event instead of a casual cookout. I almost didn't go. Part of me knew what was coming. But another part of me, call it stubbornness, call it hope, still wanted to believe maybe I was imagining it. Maybe things weren't as bad as they seemed. I was wrong. The moment I walked in, I could feel the eyes. Quick glances, little smirks, like I was the outsider crashing their exclusive club. My daughter greeted me politely enough, but there was distance in her hug. The kind of hug you give an acquaintance, not your father. At first, things were fine. We ate. We drank. I chatted with a couple of neighbors who seemed friendlier than her husband's family. But as the night wore on, the conversations shifted, like they always did, to business. Deals, contracts, investments, politics. I kept quiet, just listening. And then one of them, her husband's uncle, I think, turned to me and said with that fake smile, "So what do you think, sir? You've been awfully quiet. Surely you have some wisdom to share?" It was bait, but I took it. I made a comment. Nothing earth-shattering, just a simple observation from my own years of experience. And that's when it started. Her mother-in-law leaned over and said loudly enough for the whole group to hear, "Oh, that's cute. He's trying to use the lingo." Everyone laughed. Everyone. Even my daughter. I felt the heat crawl on my neck, but I stayed calm. I tried again, rephrased it, thinking maybe I'd said it wrong. But then her father-in-law jumped in. No, leave him be. He's doing his best." It's like watching a tourist try to order in a foreign country. The laughter grew louder. This wasn't subtle anymore. This was open mockery. And my daughter? She didn't defend me. She didn't shut it down. She giggled. She actually giggled at me. I wanted to walk out right then, but pride kept me glued to that chair. I clenched my jaw, smiled tightly, and took another sip of my drink, pretending it didn't cut me like a knife. But they weren't done. Not by a long shot. Later in the evening, someone brought up a recent business merger, and I, stupidly, tried to join in again. I mentioned something about contracts and compliance. Immediately, the brother-in-law mimicked me, exaggerating my words, twisting my accent, making everyone roar with laughter. It was like high school bullies all over again. Only this time, the bully was my daughter's family. And the final blow, my daughter turned to me, smiling sweetly, and said, "Dad, maybe you should just listen. This stuff is a little over your head." Over my head. I sat there, staring at her, my own child, telling me I wasn't good enough to even speak. Not smart enough. Not polished enough. Not worthy of joining their conversations. Something inside me hardened that night. Shame had burned away, leaving something stronger behind. Anger. Cold, quiet anger. They thought I was a fool. They thought I was beneath them. But I knew something they didn't. I might not have their words, but I had something more dangerous: patience. And the patience to wait for the right moment can destroy even the strongest wall. So I let them laugh. I let them mock me. I let my daughter dismiss me like I was nothing. Because inside, I made another promise. One day, I would flip the script. And when I did, their laughter would die in their throats. There's a certain kind of pain that doesn't come from fists or knives. It comes from words. Words you weren't meant to hear. Words whispered in private, but sharp enough to cut through bone when they reach your ears. That's the kind of pain I felt the night I overheard my daughter's new family talking about me. It was after another dinner at their house. The night had gone the same as usual: smiles, fake politeness, subtle digs at me sprinkled between glasses of wine. By then, I was used to it. I perfected the art of nodding along while swallowing the fire burning in my chest. But that night, as people drifted off to different rooms, I stepped outside for some air. I wasn't ready to leave yet, but I needed a break. Needed space to breathe. When I came back in, I walked past the kitchen and froze. Because there they were, my daughter, her husband, his parents, all standing in a little circle, talking in low voices. They didn't see me. They didn't hear me. And they sure as hell didn't think I was close enough to catch every word. Her father-in-law was speaking. His voice carried that smug, dismissive tone I'd come to hate. "Look, sweetheart," he said to my daughter, "your dad is never going to fit in with us. He's not educated. He doesn't understand this world. He'll always sound small." I felt my stomach drop. Then her mother-in-law chimed in. "Exactly. He means well, I'm sure. But he'll only hold you back. You don't need to drag him into everything. Honestly, it's better if you keep some distance." And then, the worst part, the silence that followed. That was my chance. That was the moment my daughter could have defended me. She could have said, "No, you're wrong. He's my father. He belongs here as much as anyone." But she didn't. She sighed, soft but clear, and said, "I know. Sometimes he just embarrasses me." Embarrasses me. The word slammed in me harder than any insult I'd ever taken in my life. I've been cursed at, spit on, shove around. None of it compared to hearing my own daughter agree that I wasn't good enough. I backed away before they saw me, heart pounding, ears ringing. I made it to my car, sat behind the wheel, and just stared at nothing for a long time. You raise a child. You give her everything you've got. You sacrifice, you bleed, you break yourself in half to make sure she grows up safe and comfortable. And then one day, she stands with strangers and calls you an embarrassment. That night, something inside me died. The part of me that wanted their approval, their acceptance, it was gone. But something else was born in its place. Something colder. Something sharper. See, they thought they'd broken me. They thought their laughter and their whispers had crushed me down to size. What they didn't realize was that they had just given me fuel. Because here's the truth. I didn't need to fit into their world. I just needed to find the cracks in it. And I already knew one thing. People that smug, that arrogant, that untouchable in their own minds, they always have cracks. And once I found them, I make sure the whole damn house came crashing down. They thought I was small. They thought I was weak. They thought I was uneducated, clumsy, out of touch. But here's what they didn't know. I've been underestimated my whole damn life. See, I never had the fancy degrees. I didn't grow up with wealth. I wasn't taught how to speak like a politician or shake hands like a CEO. What I had was grit. What I had was experience. And what I had was survival instinct. The kind you only learn when failure means no food on the table. While they were sitting in classrooms, memorizing definitions, I was out there making deals in back offices and dusty construction sites. While they were polishing resumes, I was knocking on doors, chasing jobs, figuring out how to keep 10 men employed through a recession. While they were mocking my accent, I was balancing budgets by hand, fixing mistakes others didn't even notice. And let me tell you something about being underestimated. It's a weapon. People show you their weaknesses when they don't think you matter. They slip. They get sloppy. They brag too much. They cut corners. They think no one is watching. But I was watching, because behind their polished image, I knew the truth. No one that arrogant is flawless. I started thinking back on my own career. For 30 years, I ran a small contracting company. It wasn't glamorous, but it was real. We handled permits, inspections, legal paperwork. I learned early on that one wrong line in a document could sink a deal. One missing signature could cost thousands. I might not have had their vocabulary, but I damn sure knew how to read between the lines. And I knew people. Inspectors, clerks, city officials. Guys I'd shared beers with after long days, people I'd helped when their roofs caved in, people who remember me not as some uneducated nobody, but as a man who kept his word. That was my world. That was my strength. So when my daughter's new family laughed at me, told her I'd never be on their level, I didn't just get angry. I got curious. What kind of business were they running? What contracts did they sign? What shortcuts did they take? I'd heard little bits from their bragging, big development deals, government bids, high-paying contracts. They liked to puff up their chests and show off. But the more I listened, the more I caught small details that didn't add up. Dates that didn't match. Terms that didn't sound right. Documents that were handled too quickly. That's when I realized they weren't just arrogant. They were careless. And careless people leave trails. So I made a decision. I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to beg for respect. I wasn't going to try to force my way into their world. I was going to wait. I was going to watch. I was going to dig. Because I had something none of them had. Patience. And while they laughed at me for stumbling over a few words, I was already planning how to use their own words, their own mistakes, against them. One day, they'd find out the hard way that I wasn't just some bumbling old man. I was the storm they never saw coming. Once I made up my mind, the anger I carried turned into focus. I wasn't going to scream. I wasn't going to beg for their respect. I wasn't even going to confront my daughter. No, that would be too easy for them. They'd brush me off, laugh again, and move on. Instead, I started watching, listening, collecting pieces of information like puzzle parts. Her in-laws loved to brag. At every dinner, every barbecue, every casual gathering, they couldn't help themselves. They dropped company names, tossed around numbers, and flexed their supposed expertise. To anyone else, it might have sounded impressive. But to me, to a man who's read contracts for 30 years, it sounded sloppy. I started jotting things down. Dates, names, specific projects they kept mentioning. A real estate deal here, a government contract there, an upcoming inspection. They thought I was sitting quietly because I didn't understand. But the truth was, I understood more than they realized. After a few weeks, I had a little notebook full of notes. To anyone else, it probably looked like gibberish, but I could see the cracks forming. And when I spotted the first real opening, I almost smiled. See, they kept talking about this one big contract, millions of dollars on the line. They were so proud of it, so smug. But when I cross-checked some of the details they bragged about with public records, permits, filings, deadlines, I noticed something. The paperwork didn't line up. One permit was expired. Another had been filed late. A compliance document had the wrong codes listed. Tiny mistakes, maybe, but in business that big, tiny mistakes can explode into disasters. That was when I knew I was onto something. But I didn't stop there. I started pulling every public record I could get my hands on. City planning documents, inspection reports, tax filings. It wasn't hard. Most of it is open to anyone who knows where to look. And I knew exactly where to look. The deeper I dug, the worse it got. Shady shortcuts, backdated signatures, numbers that didn't match from one form to another. It was a mess hiding under a polished surface. And here's the thing. They were so damn arrogant, they didn't even try to cover it up properly. They thought no one would ever notice. But I noticed. I remember sitting at my kitchen table one night, papers spread out in front of me, a cup of black coffee at my side. I stared at their mistakes, one after another, and realized I had them. Not yet completely, but the noose was tightening. And for the first time in months, I felt calm. They'd mocked me for not understanding their world. They'd told my daughter I was an embarrassment, someone to be ashamed of. But in their world, the polished, professional, sophisticated world, they were the fools. And I was the one holding the flashlight on their cracks. It wasn't time to strike yet. Not even close. A smart man doesn't swing the hammer until he's sure the foundation will crumble with one hit. But I had time, and I had patience. So I kept digging, kept watching, kept waiting, because every laugh they threw my way was just another nail in their own coffin. And when the day came, I was going to make sure the collapse wasn't just private, it was public. By the time the next family dinner rolled around, I had enough dirt on my daughter's in-laws to sink a ship. Not all of it yet. No, I was still digging, but enough to know that their shiny empire was built on rotten foundations. But instead of keeping my distance, I showed up with a smile. They thought I was still that same quiet, embarrassed man who sat in the corner pretending not to understand. And I decided to let them keep thinking exactly that. Because the easiest way to destroy arrogant people is to let them believe they're smarter than you right up until the moment the hammer falls. The dinner was at their house again. Big table, expensive wine, food I could barely pronounce. Everyone talking over each other, tossing business jargon around like confetti. It was their little game, and I knew my role, the butt of the joke, so I played it. When the topic shifted to real estate contracts, I leaned forward, furrowed my brow, and purposely used the wrong term. Something obvious, something even a rookie would know was wrong. Her father-in-law smirked instantly. That's not how it works, you know. You can't just mix up escrow with equity. The table laughed. Her brother-in-law repeated my words in a mocking voice, stretching the syllables like a cartoon. My daughter shook her head with a smile that said, "There he goes again." And me? I smiled too. I nodded like I was embarrassed. I even scratched my head, pretending to be confused. Inside, though, I was laughing harder than all of them combined. Because what they didn't know was that while they mocked me for misusing a word, I was sitting on proof that their own paperwork was riddled with errors that could cost them millions. Later in the evening, when they moved on to bragging about their latest project, I asked another dumb question, this time about compliance codes. Her mother-in-law chuckled and patted my hand like I was a child. "Oh, don't worry about those details," she said. "That's too complicated for outsiders." Outsiders. That word stuck with me, but I kept my mask on. I let them believe I was out of my depth. I let them bask in their superiority. Every smirk, every laugh, every dismissive wave of the hand, they were sharpening the knife I was going to use on them. At one point, my daughter leaned in and whispered, "Dad, just enjoy the food. Don't stress yourself trying to keep up." Keep up. I wanted to laugh in her face, but I didn't. I just nodded and took another bite. Because what she didn't realize was that I wasn't trying to keep up, I was setting the pace. By the end of the night, they were smug and satisfied. They thought they'd put me in my place again, reduce me to a background character in their little performance. But as I walked out that door, shaking hands and smiling politely, I knew the truth. The stage was almost set. The players were in position. And soon, the audience would see who the real fool was. All I had to do now was wait for the perfect moment to pull the curtain back. By this point, I had everything I needed. The notes, the documents, the mismatched dates, the sloppy signatures. I could see the cracks in their empire as clear as day. But having the evidence was only half the battle. The real trick was making sure their downfall happened in front of the right people. Private failure? That wouldn't sting enough. No, they needed to be exposed. Publicly, loudly, in a way that would make every laugh they'd had at my expense come back to choke them. That's where my old contacts came in. See, 30 years in contracting teaches you more than how to swing a hammer. It teaches you how to navigate red tape, who to call when paperwork doesn't add up, and how to keep projects alive when inspectors start asking tough questions. And over the years, I'd built relationships. Not best friends forever relationships, but the kind built on respect. One of those relationships was with a city inspector named Frank. I hadn't talked to Frank in years, but back in the day, I'd helped him out more than once. When his basement flooded, I fixed it for next to nothing. When he needed quick help on a project, I got it done before deadline. He never forgot, so I made a call. "Frank," I said when he picked up, "it's been a while. How's the basement holding up?" We talked for a bit, catching up. Then I steered the conversation where it needed to go. I told him I'd been hearing about a certain family's company, one that had gotten a little too comfortable bending the rules. I didn't give him everything right away, just enough to pique his interest. A date that didn't match here, a permit that didn't exist there. Frank's tone changed. "You're saying they're cutting corners?" "I'm saying," I replied, "if you pull the right thread, the whole thing will unravel." He chuckled. "You always had a nose for this stuff." We agreed to meet. I handed him copies of the records I'd gathered, highlighted every inconsistency I'd found. He flipped through them slowly, eyebrows rising higher with each page. "Damn," he muttered. "If this is true, they're in trouble. Big trouble." "It's true," I said. "And I want to make sure when you check, you don't do it quietly." Frank looked at me for a long moment. "You want this public?" "Exactly. See, if they got caught in some back office, they'd spin it. They'd cover it up, pay a fine, and move on. But if it happened in front of investors, partners, and, most importantly, my daughter, they wouldn't be able to hide." So Frank did what Frank does best. He scheduled a surprise inspection. And not just any inspection. A full review of their contracts, permits, and compliance documents. And guess who just so happened to be invited to that meeting as a family guest? Me. I made sure my daughter would be there too. I dropped a few hints, played the part of the eager dad still trying to learn from her new family. "Maybe I'll come along to one of your business meetings sometime," I told her, smiling like a fool. She sighed, but eventually agreed. Perfect. The stage was set. The actors were ready, and the curtain was about to rise. All that was left was the show. The day of the meeting came faster than I expected. I dressed simply, nothing flashy, just a clean shirt, pressed slacks, polished shoes. The kind of clothes that say, "I'm here to observe, not impress." When my daughter saw me, she looked nervous. "Dad, remember," she whispered before we walked in, "just let them handle the business talk. You don't need to say anything." I nodded. Of course. We walked into a sleek conference room. Long glass table, investors seated in suits, my daughter's in-laws glowing with fake confidence. They shook hands, smiled, poured coffee. They thought it was just another day to brag about numbers and show off their empire. But then the door opened, and in walked Frank, the inspector, clipboard in hand, badge clipped to his shirt. The room went quiet. "What's this about?" her father-in-law asked, his smile faltering. "Routine compliance review," Frank said evenly. "We've had some inconsistencies flagged. Nothing to worry about. Unless, of course, there's something to worry about." I could see the color drain from their faces. The review began. Frank laid out document after document. He didn't yell, didn't accuse. He just asked questions. The kind of questions that cut deeper than any insult. Why was this permit filed 2 months late? Why is this code listed incorrectly on 3 separate contracts? Can you explain why this compliance report has 2 different signatures dated a week apart? Each time, the in-laws stammered. Excuses, half-truths, nervous laughter. But the investors weren't laughing. Their faces grew darker with every page Frank turned. I sat back quietly, hands folded, watching the empire collapse in real time. My daughter's eyes darted from Frank to her in-laws, then to me. I kept my expression neutral, calm, but inside my heart was steady, cold, focused. The final blow came when Frank held up a thick stack of papers. "This contract here, this one you've been bragging about, it's invalid. Wrong codes, expired permits, non-compliant signatures. If you proceed with it, you'll be in violation of multiple regulations." Silence. Heavy, suffocating silence. One of the investors cleared his throat. "If that's true, we're pulling out. We can't be associated with this." Another nodded. "We can't risk this kind of liability." The in-laws tried to protest, to spin it, to insist it was a clerical error. But it was too late. The damage was done. Their credibility crumbled right there in front of everyone. And then, for the first time in years, my daughter looked at me. Not with embarrassment, not with pity, but with shock. Maybe even respect. I didn't gloat. I didn't smirk. I just sat there, steady as stone, while the people who mocked me drowned in their own arrogance. Frank closed his folder. "We'll be in touch," he said flatly, before walking out. The investors followed. One by one, they shook their heads at the in-laws, muttering about wasted time and ruined reputations. And just like that, the mighty family that once laughed at me was left in silence, their empire reduced to rubble in a single afternoon. I stood, straightened my shirt, and turned to my daughter. "Sometimes," I said quietly, "it's not about the words you use. It's about whether you actually know what they mean." And then I walked out. Walking out of that building, I felt lighter than I had in years. For so long, I had carried the weight of humiliation, the sting of being dismissed by my own daughter, the laughter of people who thought they were untouchable. But that day, the burden slipped off my shoulders. I didn't win because I destroyed them. I won because I didn't let them destroy me. For the first time in months, I could breathe easy. I didn't need their approval. I didn't need their acceptance. I didn't even need my daughter to finally see me for who I really was. Because deep down, I knew my worth. I always had. It just took their cruelty to remind me of it. But something unexpected happened. Later that night, my daughter came to my house. No husband, no in-laws. Just her. She stood at my door, looking smaller than I'd seen her in years. "Dad," she said quietly, "I'm sorry." Her eyes were red. I could tell she'd been crying. "I should have defended you. I should have stood by you. I'll let them make me forget who you are." I didn't say anything right away. I just listened. For once, she wasn't correcting me. She wasn't rolling her eyes. She wasn't laughing at me. She was my daughter again, the girl who used to run into my arms after school, the girl who once believed I could fix anything. "I don't expect you to forgive me right away," she whispered, "but I want to try to make it right." I took a long breath, then nodded. "You don't need to be like them to be happy," I told her. "And you'll never be too old to be my daughter." She broke down crying, and I held her. It didn't erase the hurt, but it started to heal it. As for her in-laws, their reputation never fully recovered. Investors pulled out, contracts were canceled, whispers spread like wildfire. The same arrogance that once made them laugh at me became the rope they hung themselves with. And me? I didn't gloat. I didn't brag. I went back to my quiet life, proud of what I'd built, proud of who I was. Because respect doesn't come from fancy words or fake smiles. It comes from standing your ground and knowing your own worth. So in the end, I didn't just get revenge. I got peace. And maybe that's the best revenge of all. Backhand index pointing right if you enjoyed this story. Make sure you subscribe so you don't miss more wild tales like this. Hit the like button to support the channel and drop a comment below. Do you think I did the right thing? And tell me, what would you have done if you were in my place?